Welcome, bienvenue, welcome to another Whiteboard Wednesday with Richard C. Pendry of the Risk Consultancy. What are we talking about today, Richard?
We're talking about insider risk, Gareth.
Wow. Well, I immediately that sparks off the imagination. I'm thinking of people creeping around in the background in shops and looking for hidey holes, but I bet you it's nothing like that.
Yeah, okay. There's an element of that to it. There is an element of that.
Yeah. Well, let me cut to the chase. Why is it important?
Well, the thing is, when you think of, there's figures to substantiate that nearly a third of businesses that go bust, they just cease to exist, do so because of insider risk. Okay.
Right.
Insiders are stealing what is not theirs and putting it out there. So
trusted people inside your inner circle,
people within your organization, right, that they're authorized to access and all the rest of it, and they just give away what is yours. And there's it's around about 31% of businesses that go bust is because of embezzlement and bad things happening by people from inside their business. So it's very important, very important. So when we look at this, right, we've already got, now there's for people who are looking at this, we've already got the first 3 videos up on the on the YouTube channel.
Yes, indeed.
The last one that went up was the threat, which is one of the principal parts of security risk management. And I wanted to, when we got to the threat, I wanted then to pause a little while and have a look more in depth at that subject. So last time we were on, we looked at situational awareness, how we can use that tool to actually identify the threat. And before we go on to the next part, which is vulnerability, I wanted to have a look at insider threat, because it's a very insider risk, because it is a very salient and a very important part for any organization. So that's why
I'm intrigued. Yeah. I'm intrigued.
Okay. So today today when we start off, we're going to have a look at a definition on and the types of actions that insiders do. Okay. Who are the insiders? Why they do it, what their motivation is. And then finally, we're going to look at how we can actually reduce insider risk from happening.
All right.
Okay. Well, and I know it's not lunchtime, and I know it's not a Wednesday, but because of all the bank holidays and all the rest of it, we're a little bit late behind. So what I want people to do, grab a brew and put your headphones on, and here we go. As always, let's start off with a definition. Insider risk is defined by the NPSA, that's the National Protective Security Authority, as the potential for harm from individuals who have or had authorized access to an organization's resources, that is including people, systems, data, and infrastructure. These insiders can cause extensive harm, and they can do this by data theft and leaks, including intellectual property, trade secrets, personal information, credit card information, for example, of individuals. They can sabotage physical, digital, or operational items. Violence or terrorism. Good example of this is British Airways employee by the name of Rajib Karim, who planned a terrorist attack by using his insider access. Reputational damage. Public trust can quickly collapse in an organization. I don't know if you remember, this happened to the Met Police a few years ago after the murder of Sarah Everard by one of its members, PC Cousins. Fraud and embezzlement. Case in point, Martin Sargent, a Church of England employee who stole 5.2 million over 11 years. Good to note that there is evidence to suggest that up to 30% of business failures, why companies go bust, is due to employee theft or embezzlement. Who are these insiders? Who are the adversaries? They're anybody that has access to your organization assets. Assets being something of value to the organization. Remember, we covered assets and its definition in an earlier program. Employees, that's self-explanatory. Contractors, people who you allow on site. Cleaners, security, tradespeople. Suppliers, people who are delivering things to you. Former staff members. But it's important to acknowledge that employees often have greater potential for harm than external actors. And that's because they're trusted, they're authorized, their activity is often invisible or normalized. You're used to seeing them there. There's a really good program called Cleaning Up. It stars Sheridan Smith, and she's a cleaner working in Canary Wharf for a financial company. And the information that her and her colleagues managed to steal, they used to play the markets. Yeah, really good program, well worth a watch. Good to note, though, that most employees do not join at outset with malicious intent. A government study found that only 6% of insider threats were infiltrators. The rest developed their intentions after joining and realizing the lack of security, how vulnerable the actual assets were. So let's have a look at why people conduct these nefarious activities. We have human error, negligence. People are not trained, they just make mistakes, sending sensitive files to the wrong recipient, clicking on phishing emails, misconfiguring security settings, making a database public, for example, forgetting to lock screens or devices, taking home sensitive paperwork. We used to see this when we relied on hard copies more. You know, people would go home and leave top secret plans on the trains and on buses. Not so much nowadays. Motivations for this, I like to use the RICE acronym, R standing for reward, which could be money, sex, whatever they want as a reward, that's what they get. Ideology, religion, politics, activism, coerced, people being made to do things by an external actor, and ego, a sense of entitlement, disregard for the rules. Question which I want you to answer in the chat below. What do you think is the most powerful of the motivations there? What's the most powerful motivation? Let me know what you think. So how do we actually reduce the risk? How do we mitigate? Many insider threats begin with an opportunity. They know or they can see that the asset is actually vulnerable. Unguarded doors, unchallenged access, unmonitored movement, for example. So we'll have to look at physical security measures. They serve not just to stop unauthorized, but to signal that security is taken seriously, which is a deterrent if you have a good security structure and a good security culture within your organization. So staff screening. Before they join the company, you can do background checks. Social media, really good way of doing that. Check an individual's social media activity. Not just at the outset, but when they're actually promoted to a higher position, they get more authority and they get more access. Restricted access within your building, within your organization. It has to be on a need to go basis or a need to see basis. We really need to move beyond cyber thinking because a lot of this comes down to physical security. People are mostly the weakest link in any security process. Does your organization have a clear desk policy, for example? Something easy as that. You need to be able to build a culture of trust and accountability within your organizations. And that is really beneficial because higher trust organizations retain their talent better. They're more innovative and it's easier to detect insider risk faster. Build trust with verification. That's where personal security comes in. Not just vetting, but continuous understanding of people and their context. And finally, the 3 levers of risk reduction. Reduce the threat. Background checks, awareness by staff. Reducing the vulnerability to the assets, access control, separation of duties. And reducing the impact. response plans, backup, insurance, all these things to reduce the impact if it actually does happen. Insider risk is not just a security problem, guys. It's a people problem. And it's not just about malicious acts. It's about the conditions that allow harm to grow in silence. If you remember one thing from today's episode, it's this. The greatest threat to your organization may already have authorization and a password.
Wow, I learned a lot there, but it's actually left me with questions. Let me first of all, the question you posed in there was the most powerful motivation, and I thought maybe it was control. Is that it?
No, so we used RICE, okay? So reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. So which one do you think? Which one of those four?
Ego.
Ego? Okay. All right. The example there would be somebody who thinks that they are better than the organization. They might have worked there for a great deal of time. They might have been skipped over for promotion. Yeah, the rules don't apply to them. No. The least one is coercion. If you're forced into doing something, you are less likely to do it in future. The strongest one is ideology.
Really?
Yeah, ideology.
So belief systems of one sort.
Ideology. Ideology is religion, politics, activism. Those are really strong motivational tools for getting for people doing things. And I'm glad you picked up on that, because we see more. Yeah, we understand about religion, but activism is a really big ideology, a growth ideology. People want to save the planet, and they can be in your organization. And if they think that the organization that they're working for isn't doing enough, then that can be, very, very troublesome. Trust me, I've seen it. I've seen the result of it.
Just for instance, the people at Just Stop Oil, and on the other side of the coin, we got representatives of the MAGA contingent who very famously imposed their will on the Capitol Hill in America.
Ideology, very, very. It is the strongest motivation.
Really? Wow. Did not realize that. So you've mentioned two things a couple of times, actually, more than a couple of times, and I thought they were synonyms of each other, but it turns out they're not. Insider threat and insider risk.
Okay.
What would be the difference?
Yeah. All right, we got it right. So we need to define that again. Okay. So when we talk about insider threat is more subjective. We're looking at the adversaries, the people who are actually out there who want to cause you harm. Right. Whereas insider risk is more objective in as much as from previous things we've said that we identify a threat and we calculate the risk. So we identify the adversaries for the insider threat. But when we look at insider risk, we look at the threat and what happens with the impact and the likelihood of that threat realized and the impact. So we're looking at different factors. So the risk is more objective and it takes into consideration threat, likelihood, and impact. And people get confused with that. But I'm glad
the threat is the bad stuff that could happen, and the risk is what it would cost you, kind of thing.
Yeah, the threat is a danger. The threat is the danger. Okay, but the risk is the danger realized, how likely it is to be realized, and the impact if it does actually happen. So the risk, insider risk, is the whole concept.
Wow. I don't know about you guys. I've learned already a lot, as I said jokingly to Richard on the way into this podcast today. By the end of this series, I'm going to be an expert. There's some
everybody will well be on their way to being an expert. We're on episode 5 now. I think I've got 10 or 11 maybe for the whole risk management process. Remember, if you're part of the Security Institute, the email will be in the comments. email me and I'll give you your CPD certificate. Next Wednesday, and it will be a Wednesday this week, next week, we'll be looking at vulnerability, which is the next part of the security risk management process.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, and to all those out there that it's interesting, isn't it? Because stuff that I've taken for granted, actually, it means I'm going to keep my eyes firmly peeled open. Thank you so much, Richard. Until next Wednesday, I wish all
stay low, move fast, and keep well informed.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.